Alright, today we're going to cover one of my favorite movies of all time, The Shining. So this was a book written by Stephen King and later adapted to movie form by Stanley Kubrick. And in the movie you have starring Jack Nicholson as Jack, Shelley Duvall as his wife Wendy, Danny Lloyd as Danny, their son, and Scatman Crothers as the Black Undertaker of the hotel. And there's a couple other actors as well, like Barry Nelson as Ullman and Philip Stone Grady as the first caretaker. So that's so the plot takes place. Jack's kind of this. He's a writer. He's teaching to make ends meet. So very similar to the background of Stephen King. He started as a kind of a teacher, and then as he made a couple books, I think it was Carrie was his breakout novel. He was able to kind of leave the teaching aside. So it's kind of a really close inspiration for this movie was from Stephen King. He stayed at this really creepy hotel in Colorado, up in the mountains, and they were snowed in for a weekend. And then the whole novel came to him as far as his hotel. These people are trapped in this hotel in the snow, and there's no escape. And then they literally go crazy. So that's kind of the basis of the plot. So you have Jack. He's a writer and a teacher, and he's really looking to break forward on his first really good novel. He gets this gig up at this hotel, this great fortune to go oversee this hotel for three months in the winter. At the same time, he can obviously write his book in nice, quiet solitude, really knock it out. There's no distractions, so he's really going to knock out this novel, right? And so he's accompanied with this Wendy, his wife, who's this kind of fragile wife. She's a smoker, but kind of a little quirky. And definitely they chose the characters really well for this. Danny's like a normal boy, except he has this imaginary friend who he's always talking to. So in the beginning, you're like, okay, he's got an imaginary friend. It's pretty normal, right? But then later in the film, we figure out he actually has the Shining. So as they get to the hotel, they meet this character, Holoran, who's one of the behind-the-scenes guys for the hotel. I think he was maybe a butler. And so he's showing them through the hotel. And as he walks the family through, he starts talking to Danny with his mind only. And Danny's like, oh my God, you can hear voices too, And so at this point we know they both have the Shining, which is this special skill set to be able to speak telepathically, but as well to read the good and the bad of a sight. So in the beginning of the story, before they go, Danny has a little bit of a foreshadowing that this hotel is really a bad place to go to. He's talking to his friend, who he talks to like this. So that's really interesting, this really character between, hey, what are you doing? Don't go to the hotel. And then Danny's like, why? Why not go to the hotel? Because it's bad. So it's a really fun dialogue scene, because kids do talk to themselves and they have their imaginary friends. So at first you think it's imaginary friend, and then later it turns out it's actually, he's telepathic. Now, interesting enough, the father also is telepathic but doesn't know it. So as they go to this hotel, and the wife is completely blank, neutral, has no reaction to the hotel except that they're isolated. So the wife sets up a pattern of like cleaning the hotel, walking around, checking the breakers, talking back and forth on the CB with the local station. So she's keeping busy and keeping to herself, while Jack's kind of pounding away on his novel, but it's not going as is expected. So about midway through, Jack's getting more and more crazier with this hotel, because the hotel is taunting him. Like Wendy and the son, they go out in a maze, and this isn't in the book, but it was in the novel. In the movie, just because it's a really great visual effect with the hedgerows. They did have the hedgerows in the book, but they use it differently. So in the movie, they have the hedgerows, so they're going through the maze, and Jack stumbles upon this maze scenario in the hotel where it's a map of the whole maze, and he actually can see them moving through the maze. So at this point, Jack's starting to get a special connection with the hotel. Jack just thinks he's going crazy maybe, but he doesn't realize he has this ability, and the hotel is actually kind of demonized. But at the same time, the way Kubrick plays this film, you really don't know if Jack's going crazy or is the hotel possessed. So this is a really interesting dynamic. So he sees him go through the maze, and at some point, he's getting wackier and wackier, and he stumbles into this hotel room, which Scatman Crothers told him not to go into. Doorman, he says, don't go in there at all, to Danny. But Jack goes in there, and then he goes in there, and then, this was obviously a scene of one of the heart of the possession of the hotel. And so he goes in there, and there's this woman, and she comes out of a bathroom, she's naked, beautiful. Jack's like, ooh, looks good. So he gets closer and he's like, wow. And he starts kissing her. And then before his eyes, this beautiful young woman turns to an old, haggard woman with scabs and pus coming out of her shoulder. It's like super disgusting. He's like, ah, and he leaves. And he's like, oh my God, what the hell was that? And so Jack's really disturbed. Now later, Danny stumbles into this room because it's finally open. And he comes back and he's been abused, right? Wendy obviously accuses Jack, hey, why did you hurt my boy? What are you doing there? And Jack's like, I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. You know, and it was the hotel, obviously. Or so we think, you know, maybe it's Jack, maybe it's the hotel. So there's this really great dynamic where you really don't know who's to blame. At this point, there's a break in the family. And Wendy accuses him, you know, of this crime. And at this point, she hits him over the head and locks him away in the dry storage, right? And then she's going to go to call the police. But unfortunately, Jack has already taken the fuses out of the radio and hid them. So there's no way to get contact with the outside world. She's calling. She's like, oh my God, there's no one to call. So she's in a panic. And she goes out to the snowcat, which is this huge thing. It's kind of like where the big scooper that scoops up in construction sites. So this is kind of a snowmobile that's huge, you know, with full-size metal gears like a tank, so it can ride on top of the snow. So the snow is really deep. So she goes out there. That doesn't turn over. She's like, oh my God, we're not going to get out of here. You know, what the hell is going on? In the meantime, this other character, Grady. Now, Grady, before Jack gets locked up and she knocks him over the head, he goes into the bar room where there's a bar, and usually it's empty, obviously, right? So he goes in there and it's like this big party's going on, and he's like, what the heck is this? This is kind of nice. And he stumbles up to the bar. The barman starts talking to him. What do you have? And he's like, oh, I didn't see you there. And he's like, oh, I'm just going crazy, right? He says, hey, give me a scotch, whatever. So he pours him a scotch. He's having a scotch, and he's like, oh, this is the white man's burden, right? And so this is kind of a reference to, you know, the white man obviously stole all the land from the Indians, and this hotel is built on Indian burial grounds. So that's how the hotel is possessed. It's built on this Indian burial ground that's sacred, and the white man stole the land from the Indians and built this hotel on it. And the Indians actually tried to attack the hotel, which is foreshadowed earlier in the film. Just slightly, but just, you know, they say, oh, we even have a couple arrows in the hotel, right? And there's all these Indian decorations throughout the whole hotel. So it has this really interesting mix of why the hotel is possessed and why these people really deserve to be taken over. It's like the guilt of their forefathers past. So he has a drink, and so obviously he was an alcoholic, and so he stopped drinking during the hotel, which is great. He can dry out. But now he's had this drink, imaginary, but the hotel's providing him, you know, figure out a way to give him real liquor. And so he's drunk, and that's when she knocks him out of the head. She locks him up, and then Grady comes and opens the door for him, you know, because the hotel has special powers. And so Jack escapes and tries to knock up his family at this point. So this is kind of the plot, you know, I've basically given away, but a lot of people have seen this film, but it's a really great film. Now, one of the interesting points is the director, Stanley Kubrick. So Stanley Kubrick is known for making really special films, one of the greatest directors of his time. Now, what makes The Shining special? So the point I would make with The Shining and Kubrick directing, he's chosen a hotel location with these really huge ceilings. So it gives a really, really great sense visually of isolation. It's up in the middle of the mountains. At this point, it looks like it's chosen in Alaska or something. So it's a really crazy location. Worse than the original Stephen King location of Colorado. And, you know, it's built on the Indian burial grounds. And so obviously the hotel's all decorated with Indian rugs. And so this is really great foreshadowing of how deeply embedded the Indian culture is into the hotel visually. So it's a really good reminder visually. At first you're like, oh, that's really nicely decorated. But then obviously if you connect the 2 points together with the Indians attacking and the Indian decorations, you know, you can see the spirit of the hotel is still there. It's very strong. Another thing that's really interesting, as other commenters have talked about, is, you know, the abuse by the hotel. So some have suggested it's actually the father that was abusing Danny, which is a logical conclusion, that rather than the hotel attacks him. So how did they come about this? So in the beginning of the book, we see that Danny is actually hit by Jack, and he's, you know, got a little mark. And that's how Jack loses his job as a teacher and decides to take the hotel job to kind of cover things. You know, he got drunk and hit his kid, and after that he kind of writes off alcohol and tries to be not an alcoholic anymore. So we already have this bad background of Jack. He just can't control his anger, right? And he's trying to be a father, but the kid, you know, having a kid is really stressing him out. So it has a really good tension because if you're going through poverty or really hard times, the parental friction can really build up over time, and that really makes it hard to. And then with the kid being annoying, it's an explosive situation. And so with abuse, you see different things, like the kid's wearing an Apollo shirt, and if you look at the Apollo shirt, it's like a rocket going all the way up, so it looks like a huge penis in a way. So it's like that's very subtle. It's kind of jumping to conclusions, but there are subtle connections too with the hotel. There's little bears in his room, and then later there's bears at the hotel, and so you see this connection. Jack stumbles in a room, and there's a bear giving fellatio to a hotel guest. So it's like this two gay guys dressed up. One's a bear, and oh no, the woman sees it. Wendy sees it. She's like, "Oh my God, what's this?" In the hotel, she's starting to see things as well, and so she's getting disturbed by the hotel as well. So this has a really great subtext underneath. Is Jack abusing Danny or not? And you can make a pretty good argument that Jack was the one that actually attacked Danny and not the hotel. Hence Wendy's. Another really great trick is you see that Jack has writer's block and he can't write anything, and so Wendy stumbles upon his typewriter and he has stacks of paper, and he's like, "Oh wow, let me go read the novel," and all that's written is all work and no play make Jack a dull boy, over and over again. So it's just like, she's like, oh my God, that's how she realizes he's lost his mind. So, Stanley Kubrick brings these really great visuals. There's also this other foreshadowing where he's taking a tennis ball and he's whacking it against the wall. And at one point he whacks it down by this fireplace next to this rug. And one theory was it's really close to where he later kills the black doorman. But at the same time, it's also the same place where Danny finds a ball that rolls to him from the hotel itself. So, it has this really nice, like that point, it was really like a really bad point in the hotel. If it really attracts violence in that one spot. So that's a really great foreshadowing of what's going to happen later in the movie. And Stanley Kubrick came up with a lot of original ideas to visually explain horror, which is a lot of suspense and a slow build and just slowly things getting out of whack, which is similar to, say, for example, the horror behind Alien. It has this really slow build, and you see a little bit going out, a little bit of whack, and then it's like, bam, there's a huge alien, right? And and things are out of control, and they're trying to resolve it, and then they get eliminated, and there's one person who's like, you're for sure gonna die, right? So Alien has that great tension as well. And Kubrick has also had this huge foreshadowing as far as the background behind the kid, Jack as a writer, the hotel itself, all the decoration, the really crazy rooms, this black guy telling you, like, watch out for this hotel, it's dangerous, to the young boy. Like, why would he allow a young kid to be there if he has The Shining, right? But so that has a really nice touch to it. And another point people make is that Jack was always the Undertaker and Grady was not the Undertaker, which to me is kind of like this far-fetched, people are reading too much into the film, but who knows? I mean, that's another possible take. Another really interesting fold on this movie is that Stephen King kind of hated it. So Stephen King, when he envisioned his book, it's a really nice book, one of his better written books. He went to Colorado, stayed overnight, and the hotel that he was at was actually more low ceiling, very cozy, kind of a lodge effect. It was a large hotel, and isolated, but it wasn't quite so expansive as Kubrick bought. So Stephen King actually talked to another director and had a remake done. Yeah, so in 1997, Stephen King meets with this director, and they make a miniseries on TV. So they can't make it as brutal, but they have more demons. It's a little more goofier, and so it just doesn't read well. What Kubrick did was masterful, and what Stephen King wrote was great, but so unfortunately I saw the movie before I read the book, so I've seen the movie several times, like 3-4 times before I read the book. So I finally read the book. I was a great Stephen King fan when I was younger, loved all the supernatural stuff. Later I kind of drifted away, I wanted more serious writing, but for that young teen mind, it's like really great writing. Now he's writing more serious stuff, like 1963, so that was a really good novel. But anyway, so the way Stephen King wrote the book is, like, for example, there's this key word where Danny writes on the wall red rum, you know, and then it's reversed, it's murder. And so that comes out earlier in the book. So in the book, it's foreshadowed way in advance, which maybe you need to do that in the book because you retain less because it's such a long read. So you're just going to retain little tiny elements at the beginning. So you have to repeat several times so it really sticks in your mind, right? Stanley Kubrick only needs to show it once. That's all you really need. You don't need to show, and you only need to show it towards like when Jack's really about to break. And so Kubrick has a really, you know, visually he's a visual master. So, you know, he's used a much bigger hotel than what Stephen King did, and they shot this miniseries, and it was just really goofy and silly, and the couple were better looking. So Stephen King really didn't like that Jack was kind of looked crazy right out of the bat. He wanted he thought, no, my novelist is a normal guy, and this hotel is really the one driving it. So the miniseries is just really goofy, doesn't work well. Kubrick just nails it, right? So, you know, a lot of people, Kubrick's interpreted other people's material and they haven't been happy about it, but, you know, Kubrick's Kubrick, right? So another thing Kubrick did to make this film really well, and he's really well known for, he did several cuts. So the one scene in the movie where Jack is like axing through the door, they literally went through 40 different doors, and the dialogue where he's talking to Wendy and he's really taunting her, they did it like at least 40. I'm thinking maybe it's 100 different cuts. So they just went over and over and over and over until, you know, they got really creative with the dialogue and, you know, really stirred things up, and it really comes out in the film where just like, it's so primal. So Stanley was really known for, you know, just being super methodical and get all the camera shots he wants and really shoot them over and over and over and over again. He's very methodical, so it makes a huge difference in the film if you're a director to shoot, you know, a lot of cuts. You just force your actors like cut. Even after you got it, you just keep going, and maybe you'll get a better performance, maybe you won't, but you really want to just keep pushing through. There can always be a better performance, and you maybe need different angles. Kubrick really he already knows, I think, the angle, so I don't think he shot too many. He got the camera on, he shot it, and then he shot it multiple times. He probably did a couple of change-ups that maybe he didn't use. Who knows? But yeah, I would highly recommend this movie. So if you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe below. And hope to see you on my next movie review.